The president pledges his administration next week will unveil new security measures to keep America safe. Mr. Trump insists safety of all Americans is his top priority.
We'll be doing something very rapidly having to do with additional security for our country. You'll be seeing that sometime next week.
We take up the left's efforts to block the Trump administration at every turn, no matter the risk to national security. The Weekly Standard's Fred Barnes joins me. Also tonight, shocking animosity from the left. Black Lives Matter demonstrators physically blocking Education Secretary Betsy DeVos as she tried to enter a Washington, D.C. middle school this morning. We take up the left's ignorance and intolerance and its cost with the Five's co-host Kimberly Guilfoyle. General Jack Keane with me tonight as we take up Iran's threat not only to the Middle East but to the world. Good evening, everybody. A White House source telling Fox News tonight that the White House will not likely appeal the Ninth Circuit three-judge panel decision on his extreme vetting order to an en-banc session of the full Ninth Circuit Court. The administration could file, we're told, an emergency appeal with the Supreme Court and is investigating whether to fight it out as well in the U.S. District Court in Seattle on the merits of the case. President Trump today vowed quick action.
There are tremendous threats to our country. We will not allow that to happen. I can tell you that right now. We will not allow that to happen. So we'll be going forward. We'll be doing things to continue to make our country safe. It will happen rapidly, and we will not allow people into our country who are looking to do harm to our people.
Fox News Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is at the White House following the story throughout. Good evening, John. What is the latest?
Lou, good evening to you. A little hard to figure that out because there was some cross signals and some mixed signals and some crossed wires a little while ago. About 5 o'clock, we were told that it was unlikely that the White House would appeal the Ninth District Court of Appeals decision. This was a three-judge panel on the temporary restraining order when it refused to issue a stay. We were told that it was not likely that they were going to appeal that to either the Supreme Court or to an en-banc session of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And then we learned a little while later that, wait a second, no, maybe they still might take that to the Supreme Court. And then Reince Priebus, the chief of staff, came out to tell me that all options are on the table, that they could go to the Supreme Court, they could go to an en-banc session of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And then we learned that one judge from the Ninth Circuit wants all of his colleagues, or her colleagues, we're not sure if it's a man or a woman, to vote on whether or not the Ninth Circuit en-banc should rehear the case that the three-judge panel denied the stay of. So now the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals reaching out to the White House and to the plaintiffs in the case, the state of Washington and Minnesota, for briefs as to whether or not that case should be reheard. I informed Reince Priebus of that, and he ran back inside the White House, obviously, to confer with his colleagues. And then there's something else that's afoot here, Lou, and that is that the White House may rewrite the executive order on extreme vetting, tighten up the language so that there's no legal problem with it. Aboard Air Force One on his way down to Mar-a-Lago in West Palm Beach, President Trump spoke to the pool about it. Here's what he said.
You also talk about
the unfortunate part is it takes time statutorily, so it takes a little time. We'll win that battle, but we also have a lot of other options, including just filing a brand new order on Monday. Could very well be, but I like to keep you, I'd like to surprise you. We need speed for reasons of security, so it could very well be that we do that.
A little difficult to hear there, Lou, because of all the airplane noise, but basically the president said they might rewrite the order, and that would be the extreme vetting executive order. One of the big problems that the Ninth Circuit judges had with it was that it didn't have a specific carve-out for legal permanent residents in this country. There were also some concerns that people who were here on visas, if they were students or if they were professors, might not be able to get back into the country if they left to go visit family back at home. So the White House, mulling all all of this over, potentially rewriting this executive order to tighten up the language, some other executive orders potentially coming down next week, Lou, and maybe one that I saw that's been circulating here at the White House that would keep the detention center at Guantanamo Bay open for an indefinite period of time. As with everything here, it's all a moving target, Lou. So we get this kind of minute by minute, hour by hour.
The complexity that is presented to, well, first of all, to the president and his administration by all of these events that are taking place, and some of them historic, including the Ninth Circuit Court ruling. I mean, everyone does need a program, and the press and you, John, you know, following all of this. It's got to be a difficult chore. Any president is difficult to cover, but this administration, with all of the incoming, all of the initiatives that he has going, just to put it, let's make sure I've got the score correct. This is 23 executive actions and memoranda right now in 3 weeks. Is that right?
I mean, it's a tremendous number of pieces of executive action that have come out of this White House. No legislation at this point. And don't forget, Lou, the other thing that's going on here at the White House is this president has got a lot of enemies, a lot of opponents. So literally everything that comes out of this White House is somehow going to be opposed by one group or another. We talk about this one lawsuit filed by the state of Minnesota and Washington State in Seattle in federal district court. You know, Judge Napolitano's probably got the better figure on this, but I think it's something like 23 or 40 suits that are just waiting to go against what the president has been doing. So, I mean, everything that comes out of here gets, you know, gets contradicted on the other side as well. So there's a lot to look after here.
Talking with the judge last night, his count was at that point 47.
47.
Knowing the way of this thing, the number probably has risen. It probably hasn't declined in the 12 hours or 24 hours difference. John, thanks for keeping us up to date, and as always, doing a terrific job for us from the White House. Thank you.
Trying hard. Thanks, Lou.
Yes, sir. Donald Trump has referred to the Ninth Circuit Court ruling as a, quote, political decision. And by the way, he's absolutely right. And here's why. Let's take a look at our supposedly impartial judiciary. First, the liberal or left-wing Ninth Circuit Court is the most overturned appellate court in the land. It has an 80% reversal rate, that according to the American Bar Association. Think of that. 80% of its rulings are overturned. That study by the Bar Association looking at 10 terms of the Ninth Circuit Court. Liberal majorities now control 9 of the 13 Circuit Court of Appeals. That is 70% of them, and primarily because of former President Obama, who managed to place more than a third of the 179 judges on the federal appellate courts. And the liberal slant also found in federal district courts. 51% are Democratic appointees. Only 34% are Republican, and that difference is 14%. And those district court judges, well, we don't have judges. Those seats are vacant. Trump has a monumental, extraordinary opportunity to begin turning the troubling trend to the left around in our judiciary, with 118 total judicial vacancies right now. That includes 91 in the district courts, 18 in the appellate courts, and of course the one Supreme Court justice that Neil Gorsuch has been nominated to fill. Our first guest tonight says the law is now on President Trump's side. Joining me now, the executive editor at the Weekly Standard, Fred Barnes. Fred, good to have you with us.
Thank you.
I mean, here we are at Friday, and it has been another extraordinary week, a third week of this presidency in terms of news and all of the challenges that this president is facing.
Indeed. He's done a great deal, but one thing he needs to do now is to get lawyers who won't let him down, as he's been let down so far on this immigration case. Look, the president has, under the Constitution, the right to create and enforce immigration policy. There's statutory law that gives him that. Instead, his lawyers are arguing about, well, the president, here's why he did this order and so on. And the judges are asking about the president's motives, and their lawyer is talking about that. But the most glaring area was this, that all these judges at the district level and the appeals level have raised this question saying, well, gee, these 7 countries, they haven't said any terrorists haven't come from there at all since 9/11. And in fact, and the Justice Department lawyer for President Trump didn't know that there had been more than 60 cases, convictions. And he said he didn't know. I mean, the representation.
I understand your frustration with the Justice Department attorney, whose performance was, well, left something
abysmal,
perhaps considerable to be desired. But perhaps you should be inquiring of the district court judge for the Western District of the state of Washington and the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals and the 3-judge panel, who didn't even look at the statutory basis for the president's authority nor the Constitution. Instead, they started looking to, quote, the merits. In other words, trying to supplant the presidency with her own very clever and highly knowledgeable understanding of national security issues. It was a farce on every level. I wonder, by the way, Fred, this one appellate judge from the Ninth Circuit, who's now is considering an en banc hearing of this case, perhaps he or she, we don't know which, whoever requested it, is embarrassed at what those 3 judges did, because for right now, not only is it the most overturned circuit court in the country of the 13, it is also embarrassingly and utterly, I mean, it is a farce, without question.
Well, certainly the Ninth Circuit is, and has been for many years. It is the most liberal appeals court in the country, and it is overturned just as rapidly and as frequently as you mentioned. But Donald Trump can't change that in the short run, but he can change his legal defense, supporting this policy, which is popular politically, but it just hasn't been argued in favor of it effectively. An argument, look, if I'm not a lawyer, if I know the arguments that are the paramount ones here,
you're not a national security. You're not a national security advisor either, Fred. We're going to ask you this question. Okay. General Flynn talked about sanctions, apparently, with the Russians before he moved to the White House and the administration. He says he can't say that he remembers it, but he can't say that he didn't. A national security advisor who doesn't remember the basic elements of a relationship with one of the 2 principal, if you will, geopolitical rivals of this country, what are we to make of it?
We're to make of it that it was entirely improper. There's some suggestion that it was illegal for him to do that. Here he was a month before Donald Trump became president, and it had already been announced that General Flynn was going to be his national security advisor. But what is he thinking? You know, talking, I mean, I don't know whether the Logan Act applies here, but here he was dealing with the Russian ambassador. And that was entirely improper. You know, there have been some complaints about General Flynn before.
Oh, yeah.
I've never met the man, but I thought from the beginning that John Bolton, the former State Department official going back to the Bush administration, should have been the national security advisor. And maybe now's the time to make that happen.
Fred, thank you very much for that impartial judgment and recommendation. Thanks so much, as always. Great to see you. Have a great weekend. Thank you, Fred.
You too.
Joining me now, the co-host of The Five, Kimberly Guilfoyle. Great to have you here.
Great to be here with you, Lou. And I can't stand it for another minute, these education obstructionists. And that's what they are. And I'm an educator myself. I worked in special education, children, teaching them, children with special needs, learning differences. And my son was in public school in New York, been in private school in New York, just to see the difference and comparing that even with San Francisco and schools across the country. Education is of paramount importance, and school choice should also matter. And it really sometimes depends on where you're born, where you live, what school district, and you have unions obstructing all along the way, trying to keep tenure for teachers that are unfit to educate.
You know, this is, and what is Black Lives Matter doing? They're denying an education, a secretary of education who wants to help, who wants to improve, and they have some bloody message they want to carry out that has no sense, no rhyme, no reason.
And if you question them, they wouldn't be
appalling.
able to answer anything or talk about the education system or
Yeah.
what kind of needs
And the
that
people
children
behind
have.
them, the people funding them, the
Right.
people organizing are utterly, I mean, they're just more of the deplorable left.
Yeah, well,
in
they
this
should
country.
be punished. I mean, it's terrible to try and deprive a child of an education so that they can better themselves and their family going forward. It's very disconcerting to me. Let the woman go to the schools, get the information, and try to make it better.
They're scared to death
Well,
of it. But
of course
you know why?
they are.
Have we got these statistics? I just want everybody to see what's happening in this country, and that is enrollment. Students in public charter schools by city. This is in Flint, Michigan. They're moving from the public educational system where there's no discipline, there's violence, there is no quality education in too many of these schools, public schools, which is has always been
too many
the
students
great
in the class,
equalizer in our society. Could we see that, please, again, so that everybody could see it? Put up the full screen, please. Flint, Michigan. 53% of them now in public charter schools.
Yeah.
In the same in Detroit, Kansas City, 43%. In New Orleans, it's 92%.
Wow.
That doesn't include the private charter schools. It doesn't. I mean, parochial schools and private schools. I mean, this is what's going on. They're scared to death. The public education.
There's been a big fight about this in New York City.
Yeah.
As well, you know, and by the way, we've had to be able to get up in arms about education, to be able to provide what children need to succeed going forward, to stop a cycle of poverty and violence in neighborhoods so they can have economic opportunity and be the masters of their own destiny.
Two realities that are demonstrated in that chart, because it's also happening nationwide, and that it is, one, the teachers' unions are failing. They're not only failing, but they're now part of the problem. And these are young children who are being, and their families are making a decision to get away from them and get to somewhere and to somewhere that offers them the chance to get a quality education.
That's really true, but shouldn't that be something that every child is entitled to be able to have that kind of choice? And charter schools have found a way to educate and succeed. That should be embraced. So they're blocking the car and blocking the doors, essentially, to education quality in this country.
Kimberly Guilfoyle, there are a lot of things going on right now with Kellyanne Conway, and she's the counselor to the president.
Certainly.
I thought it was very funny that Hillary Clinton tweeted this out, if we could show that. 3-0, talking about the court ruling by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. It's almost embarrassing to refer to that as a court, but nonetheless.
Right.
And
Conway, they're the worst. By the way, they're overruled 80% of the time by the United States Supreme Court. All right, good job, Lou.
Yeah, thank you very much. But I do want to point out Kellyanne Conway, her response to this, if we had put that up, which I thought, there you go, Hillary. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan.
Do you love it?
I do love it. That's the way we put it up there. You found me out.
This pleases you, doesn't it,
It does indeed. Kimberly, thanks so much.
Me too. Go Kellyanne.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Kimberly.
All right, it's been
Be
fun.
sure to vote on our poll tonight. The question is the left-wing judiciary undermining our republic? Let me repeat that. Is the left-wing judiciary undermining our republic? Cast your vote on Twitter at Lou Dobbs. We'd like to hear from you on this one.
Hint, yes.
And follow me on Twitter at Lou Dobbs. Like me on Facebook. Follow me on Instagram at Lou Dobbs Tonight. And on Wall Street, stocks at all-time highs again. Record closings. I think that the President of the United States is getting a little more popular than the media is ever going to be able to stand. The Dow up 97 points, a new record high close. The S&P up 8. The Nasdaq up 19, all closing at new record highs. Volume on the big board, 3.4 billion shares for the week. The Dow, the S&P, the Nasdaq posting gains of about 1% since the markets. Since the election, the market's posting almost $2.5 trillion in increased market cap. A pretty good day. Crude oil up more than 1.5% today, near $54 a barrel. Listen to my reports 3 times a day, coast to coast on the Salem Radio Network, please. Up next, National Security Advisor General Michael Flynn under fire over conversations he may have had with the Russian ambassador before President Trump took office. We'll have a full report on the matter here next. Stay with us. New questions tonight about the president's national security advisor, General Michael Flynn, and a phone call that he had apparently with the Russian ambassador, a call made before President Trump took the oath of office. Our national security correspondent, Jennifer Griffin, has the latest for us here.
The White House is walking back a previous denial that prior to the inauguration, the National Security Advisor, former Lieutenant General Mike Flynn, spoke to the Russian ambassador about sanctions imposed by the Obama White House as punishment for Russian interference in the U.S. election. The telephone call in question took place on December 29th, the same day that President Obama struck back at Russia and expelled 35 Russian diplomats. At the time, Flynn told Vice President Mike Pence that he had not spoken about sanctions or the easing of sanctions with Russia's ambassador, Sergei Kislyak. In turn, Vice President Pence denied publicly the Trump team had spoken with the Russian envoy about easing sanctions, which, if true, could have been a violation of the Logan Act, which bars U.S. citizens from interfering with U.S. foreign policy.
I talked to General Flynn yesterday, and the conversations that took place at that time were not in any way related to new U.S. sanctions against Russia or the expulsion of diplomats.
Today, the White House changed its tune about the denial. Flynn, quote, indicated that while he had no recollection of discussing sanctions, he couldn't be certain that the topic never came up. The revised statement came after the Washington Post and multiple news outlets reported the FBI has a transcript of the phone call and that current and former intelligence officials say, according to that transcript, Flynn may have indicated the Trump team would relieve those sanctions once in office.
If they were talking about lifting sanctions, I can tell General Flynn and the Trump administration that there will be a violent reaction in the Congress.
Ranking Democrats on the CIA Oversight Committee have called for the White House to immediately suspend National Security Advisor Flynn and revoke access to classified information until the situation is fully investigated. Sources close to Flynn told me moments ago that he does not remember talking about sanctions with the Russian ambassador. If the conversation about sanctions did occur, Flynn didn't bring it up and made no commitments either way. What concerns them more is this information, which should be classified, is leaking out. In Washington, Jennifer Griffin, Fox News.
A lot of leaks coming out in the nation's capital. Jennifer Griffin, thank you very much. We're coming right back with much more. Stay with us. Hundreds of thousands of Iranians in the streets of Tehran today to mark the anniversary of the '79 Islamic Revolution. This so-called Day of Rage coming a week after the White House put Iran on notice, issuing new sanctions for test launching a ballistic missile. According to a new report from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, Iran has launched 14 ICBMs since the nuclear agreement was signed in 2015. Joining us tonight, retired four-star general, Fox News military analyst, General Jack Keane. General, great to have you with us.
Good to be here, Lou.
The Iranians chanting death to America is nothing new, but the provocative tests of these missiles and the continued rhetoric, is this a signal that we're headed toward, as they styled it, dark days with Iran?
Well, certainly, I think President-elect Trump, now President Trump, has turned the page on Iran. You know, Iranian behavior since 1980 has been pretty stark. They've used their proxies to blow up our embassies, to blow up our barracks, and no Democratic or Republican has ever contested this Iranian behavior. This president, I believe, is going to do just that, because it's the Iranian behavior, much more so than the nuclear deal, which is so troubling in the Middle East, because they want to dominate and control the Middle East. And they've had some real success in Lebanon, Syria, obviously potentially Iraq, and obviously also Yemen. And this provocative behavior, as you indicate, is weakening the alliance between our Sunni Arabs and the United States as they try to humiliate the United States. So this president is saying, no, enough is enough. He's going to begin with sanctions, and he's willing to confront them. It doesn't mean conflict and war, but it does mean we're going to stand up to this kind of aggressive behavior.
Give us your sense very quickly. I want to turn next to Afghanistan, but very quickly, Iran seems to me, at least, to be playing with fire, because they could have nearly all of their infrastructure leveled in any conflict. In pushing the United States like this, it's just a very stupid thing for them to do. And it is a highly, highly risky strategy on their part. Am I mistaken in that view?
Yes. And here's why. First of all, they're emboldened by the nuclear deal and the $150 billion windfall that they've got. But secondly, this strategy for 36 years has worked, Lou. They have domination control in a number of countries using their proxies, and we've never confronted them. Why wouldn't they continue to do it, regardless of who the new president is? They've dealt with many presidents before. So I think they're going to continue to push until we push back.
And but that's what I'm really asking. It would seem to me the United States, with its advanced weaponry and technology, could eliminate such a huge percentage of their infrastructure. They wouldn't be able to recover from it economically, forget militarily, for decades.
But they don't believe we would ever do that. They're convinced that the United States is not going to go to war with Iran over their behavior in the Middle East, and that's the evidence to date. I think this president is trying to tell them a clear intent. I have capability and I have intent to use it, and you must understand that. That is different.
Let's turn to Afghanistan, and we're apparently at a stalemate, according to the commander of our forces there. A stalemate doesn't sound like a very good place for us to be, given the effort that we have put into Afghanistan over the course of the past 16 years. Rather than go through how we got here, how can we actually start talking about achieving a military objective, a strategic objective in Afghanistan, or should we just simply withdraw?
No, we should not withdraw. It's such a troubled area. This is the area that struck our homeland, and they would do that again if they're able to get a sanctuary going again in Afghanistan. And it is actually a war that's not winnable under current policies. And you put your finger on it. We need a comprehensive strategy to deal with Afghanistan. The fact that there are 2 sanctuaries that the Taliban have in Pakistan, and we have tolerated that through 2 administrations, is absolutely outrageous, because the Pakistan military are helping them. That must stop. And then the commander needs to be told, put together a plan, together with Central Command and the Pentagon, on what is needed in terms of resources to make this commitment once and for all and bring this to an end. Yes, of course, it is winnable if we have the right policies and the right campaign plan in place to deal with this.
All right. General Jack Keane. Jack, thanks for being with us. Good to see you.
Good talking to you, Lou.
Joining us tonight, pastor at First Baptist Church in Dallas, Texas, Pastor Robert Jeffress. Pastor, great to have you with us. I want to start with this extreme vetting priority. A lot of people saying that the president is putting too much emphasis on this, that it's not right because it does include Muslims. Your thoughts from the perspective of your faith?
Well, first of all, we've done that as a nation in the past. We waited too long, but eventually in the 1940s, we helped persecuted Jewish people from Germany. In 1990, we did it with Soviet Jews who were being persecuted. So we've done this before. And Lou, people say, well, that's unconstitutional to use a religious test for who can and can't come into this country. And that's absolutely wrong. No. The Constitution has nothing to say about a religious test for discrimination. The only time the term religious test is used in the Constitution is in Article 6, referring to who can run for government. But government has a right and responsibility to monitor who does and doesn't come into this country.
Well, I'm smiling, and I'm doing so because the Ninth Circuit Court, those judges didn't have any concern about the Constitution. They didn't refer to the Constitution. No. They didn't refer to the statutes that would limit the authority. And I want to take up the pot of Pope Francis today saying this, and I want to quote him exactly, saying, a Christian would never say you will pay for that, referring to the wall. It's one thing when the Pope before has said build bridges and not walls and so forth, even though it's considerably ironic or if outright contradictory since he lives behind walls. But to say a Christian would never say you will pay for that is the Pope intervening in strictly secular political, the politics of this country.
Look, I believe the Pope is sincere. He's just sincerely wrong about this. And as I read his rationale for it, he said, well, the Bible says we're not to return evil for evil. We're to overcome evil with good and not seek revenge. He was quoting from Romans chapter 12 about individual Christians. But in the very next chapter, Paul says government is to seek revenge against those who practice evil. It is supposed to protect its citizens. And what I appreciate about President Trump is he is absolutely determined to fulfill his God-given responsibility to protect this nation.
Pastor, as always, instructive and illuminating. We appreciate it, and always good to see you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Lou.
Pastor Robert Jeffress. Up next, President Trump promises a big announcement on taxes and tax cuts very soon. Stay with us.
We're in the process right now of working on a major tax reform that will massively reduce taxes on our workers and businesses. We want to make it much easier to do business in America, and that's what we're going to do.
In our online poll we asked you last night, do you believe the Supreme Court is capable of making an honest, fair, politically neutral judgment of the president's executive order? As you see there, 66% of you said no. That is our modern politicized judiciary. Joining me now, radio talk show host, Fox News contributor Tammy Bruce. Tammy, good to have you with us.
Hi
National Affairs columnist at National Review, John Fund. John, good to have you with us. Tammy, this is laid bare for all the world now to see, but particularly Americans, that our judiciary system is as politicized as any other part of this government.
Yes, and what you've done earlier with the numbers of how many judges, how they've been appointed, these are things that no one really knows. We know there's no more civics, really, in high school, right? This has been, and it's already been a civics lesson. It has the potential of being an even better one with information like with what you've provided this evening. But what it also shows is that really, even as Judge Gorsuch noted in his acceptance remarks for the nomination, is that judges are lawyers in robes. Yeah. And they come with this kind of bias. And clearly something has to be done. It has to be changed.
And Judge Gorsuch making that crack, which was it's just as insulting to a man to whom he owes a great deal as it could be, to say it's disheartening to see criticism of the high court. I mean, that is an elitist, extraordinary view to hold, and a terrible miscalculation by a man who is obviously smarter than that.
I grant you that all of what you just said is true. It doesn't. Well,
then we have nothing further to discuss.
Oh no, but it doesn't change what
he surrenders.
Doesn't change the mistakes the administration made. If you wave a red cape in front of a mad judge, you're going to get the kind of result you saw last night, where a George
you don't think? Oh, come on, John. You don't think that there would have been a dime's worth of difference in what that court did, irrespective of what the president said?
Lawyers are surprised it was 3-0. Lawyers were surprised that the George W. Bush appointee joined in. I think the fact that the opinion, as badly as it was written, was so against the administration was because the administration has been attacking judges.
I think that the reason they're looking for an en-banc hearing now is because at least one judge on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals knows they made a farce of themselves. They absolutely a mockery.
I've looked at the numbers. They have an en-banc hearing. They're going to lose that too. Trump should regroup, rewrite the executive order, and reissue it.
Trying for that circuit to recover some semblance.
The way to do that is to break up the Ninth Circuit, which is there's a move in Congress
All you'll
to do
have
it.
is two of the same.
No, you'll have one conservative.
It's like snakes, John. That's the way it works.
Excuse me, Idaho and Arizona. I think they're going to be a conservative circuit.
I don't know why people would be surprised.
They're not appointed out of.
Yes, they are appointed out of those states. Each state appoints its own judges in that appeals court.
Let me be clear. They do not depend on the state for who puts them into the court.
There are a certain number of seats for each state.
They have to be referred by their senators, but that's...
But let's remember, though, too, with George W. Bush, it was his appointee in Washington that started this.
It wasn't really his appointee. That was a liberal judge. That was a trade-off for a power deal by the liberal senator.
Here's what we know.
It was not his appointee.
Tammy's right. It does go down as his appointee.
It's been manipulated into that.
But the fact of the matter is that we now have a man in the presidency who we have to make sure appoints genuinely conservative individuals.
Say we shouldn't take this too seriously.
But also, there's so many open seats. Trump has got to make sure that that's one of his priorities of filling those seats, because we know now the
fact of the matter is we have a circuit court in this country, and liberals control 70% of those circuits. Democrats control them and influence the left, I think, controls them, is another way to put it better. And we have a huge problem here. The left is antagonistic toward its own country, toward its own values, its traditions, and its history, and its people. This is a major, major problem.
And this is another irony, that the argument that you can't critique the judiciary is coming from the same people who are critiquing the President of the United States in obscene ways 24/7. But even the commentators, everyone else, is somehow the judiciary is this untouchable thing. They can be critiqued. They should be within the bounds of our being able to have a conversation.
For it, John.
Another way to do this is I think the president should raise term limits for justices. I think it is ridiculous to have lifetime appointments in this age. You can take care of the lifetime issue by they serve 12 years in the Supreme Court, then they go down to an appeals court. They still get their salary. They still get their benefits. We need term limits for judges just like we need them for Congress, and we have them for the president.
Idea. Betsy DeVos, the Secretary of Education, today turned away from a public school that has about half of its students unable to meet any standard on reading or mathematics. That is a disgrace, and it's in the name of Black Lives Matter, funded by in part by George Soros and the left in this country. This is, at what point is enough enough?
Well, it's going to be enough to some degree when we obliterate effectively the Democrat Party in 2018. Americans do not like this, and we're very quiet about it, but we don't like the obstruction or the destruction. This Black Lives Matter groups like Acorn, Occupy, and this is all the left has now, and Americans have rejected it.
A lot of these groups not only get funded from George Soros' private money, foundation money, they also get funded from the federal government, especially through HUD and especially through poverty grants.
Point.
Let's defund these groups. If they're going to suppress free speech and prevent students from being helped, not a single federal dollar should go
That's
there.
what we did with Acorn. It took a defunding, but then they changed their names. We've got to make sure we just cut it off at the root.
Yeah, that was as awful a scene to see. And by the way, as I said, if the school had had perfect performance and her presence was somehow an intrusion on excellence, it would be one thing. But to consign those kids to another interruption in what should be
and especially in a district where the kids who go to the private and charter schools are doing so much better.
Exactly.
Yeah, as it is nationwide. John Fund, thank you. Tammy Bruce, thank you very much. Good to see you both. That's it for us tonight. We thank you for being with us. And come Monday, Ed Rollins, Michael Goodwin, Michelle Malkin among our guests. Please be with us. For now, have a great weekend. Good night from New York.